Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Limitless Leaders live stream. Today, we're live streaming our podcast with the fabulous Annemarie Cross. And Annemarie, for those that don't know, Annemarie is a personal branding and podcast strategist and business coach. She's also the CEO and founder of Ambitious Entrepreneur Podcast Network and Industry Thought Leader Academy. And to top that off, she's also an author of Industry Thought Leader, the book From Invisible to Influential and Profitable with a Podcast. Dubbed the Podcasting Queen, and I've worked with Annemarie for a few years now, and she so deserves that title. She's an award-winning podcast host and is recognised as a podcasting engineer in her space. And she started her first podcast back in 2008. Her podcasts have been syndicated on both national and international radio and listed among the top podcasts for entrepreneurs and small businesses worldwide. She's recently been cited as one of the top 20 business coaches in Melbourne, Australia, and she works with consultants and coaches all around the world, helping them create distinguishable, uncopyable, and irresistible brands. So they're seen as not a choice, but the choice to reach their ideal clients. Along with establishing a robust podcast strategy, she helps them build their reach, their reputation to be a trusted authority, as well as building revenue as they continue to nurture listeners into leads, inquiries, and ultimately paying customers from their very first episode. So, Annemarie, welcome today.
Oh, thank you so much, Renee. It's a pleasure to be here and live streaming too. It's fantastic.
Yes, very exciting, very exciting. And I've really been looking forward to doing these podcasts, so our listeners have the choice of listening or watching. I know I'm very visual, and I love watching a podcast. So thanks for being here today. I'd love to kick off. And welcome to all of our listeners or viewers out there right now. I'd love to kick off and ask you, how have you come, I should say, to be where you are today?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. If I think back to 2008 when I started my first podcast, that was, for those of you who can recall, was when the global financial crisis hit. And I was working in the career space then as a personal brand strategist, working with executives and professionals. Loved that. Still very passionate about that industry. But we noticed that with so many job losses around the world, and I had a contract at the time with a US job career ladders, and so many people had lost their jobs and were being impacted by the doom and gloom of mainstream media, who were all talking about all of the losses and lack of hope and all of that. And so a colleague and I said, we need to be the voice of hope and inspiration. So we did that show for 2 years, and we're able to impact people from around the world. And it was such a wonderful medium. I loved podcasting, even though back then it wasn't called podcasting. And when we finished the show, I continued to podcast. And back then, a lot of people say, what are you doing that for? I said, I just love the connection, the ability to create an incredible community and meet people from around the world. And then now full circle, helping others such as yourself create their own podcast so that they can continue to connect and build community as well.
Amazing. And we'll go into that for everyone listening out there. Podcasts have become, I believe, the new normal. I mean, there's so much out there. There's so many messages we're all bombarded with. And I think especially since the pandemic, everyone's become quite tech savvy. And I think, going for a walk and listening to a podcast, I know a lot of my clients over the last 18 months, that's been their release. I know it's mine. But before we go into there, I'd love to ask you, because I've known you a few years, and I've really seen you grow and your business grow and your message and I guess purpose come to fruition. In any business, as we all know, whether you're working in an organization or you own your own business, there's challenges. And as you know, I call these gifts. I believe if we're open to unwrapping the gift in a challenging or a positive situation, we can use that to progress forward and share with others, to help replicate success. I'd love to ask you what's a key, if you had to name a key challenge you faced,
Mhm.
sort of what was it and how has it actually been a gift in helping you get to where you are now?
All right, that is such a perfect question, and the reason I say that is because a number of years, probably about 5 or 6 years ago now, I had established a partnership, and we built that partnership to a seven-figure pipeline. But
Yeah.
for reasons I won't share today, that partnership came to a crumbling halt, and I was left. Faced with, well, what am I going to do now? And looking back, I could see that I was burnt out.
Mm,
I could not create content, could not put two words together. And I know you, Renee, you're a content creator yourself, but just imagine you could not even think. And I could see looking back that I was kind of a bit depressed as well. So I thought, well, what
yeah.
am I going to do? How am I going to handle this grief and loss? And I thought, well, because I can't write or create, I can still ask great questions. And so I started Women and Leadership Podcast as a way to deal with my grief and loss. I thought, I'm going to go out and surround myself with incredible women, and
Wow.
unbeknownst to them, I'm going to interview them and ask them, well, how did you overcome challenges, so that I could learn from them? And I did that. I started Women in Leadership Podcast, but an interesting thing happened, and I call it, an accident, which actually led me down the path where I am today. And so 3 episodes in, for a podcast that I started to deal with my grief and loss, I
Mm,
accidentally generated 2 4-figure clients. And it wasn't
wow.
until a little while later, I thought to myself, if I could do that by accident, imagine if I could backtrack the steps that took that 2 women who absolutely did not know me go from not knowing me, looking for, brand consultant, business
Mm,
consultant, coming to my website, listening to the 3 episodes, having a look around, and then deciding we want to work with Annemarie. Could
yeah.
I repeat that? So that's, my book and my program later, that's now what I teach. But that worst business failure ever has now become the best thing that ever happened to me, because it led me down the path today. It was the kick up the backside that I needed, but I've learned so many lessons from that, and they've become core principles in what I now
Yeah.
teach. So I think that whilst challenges at the time that we're experiencing them can be
Mm.
difficult, the way that you look at them and approach them and take the learnings from them, they can become the foundations upon which you
Oh,
can step and just move up. And that's really what
yeah. I love that. And I think it's such, and thanks for sharing that, because I think you're right. When things are happening right under our noses, so even the pandemic, especially the first few months, it's hard to go, what is the gift in this? Or if someone gets an illness, what is the gift in this? It can be hard to find what that is until later. But I
Mm.
think if we're open to it, as you were, not only did you bring your head space in, you brought your heart space in, and your intention and purpose became clearer. And I know as well, even through, the pandemic, we and I, very open with this. We lost 90% of our business 2 weeks into the pandemic. We were on a super highway and just brakes on, and me being the eternal optimist, I actually went probably half a day. What are we going to do? How are we going to turn this painful situation into a purposeful outcome? And it was, excuse the French, bloody hard. And I just went into service and looked at it as, now we have to go online. And it was something I had resisted. I love being in a room, I still do. But now our business is probably 60% online, 40% going back face to face. And I think it's, if you're open to it and accept it, doesn't mean you have to love it or
Mhm.
condone it, but accept it. You're going to be more open to those actual lessons. And, as you know, Anne-Marie, my book is all about, what have you learned out of the 12 gifts? What gifts have you really learned from a challenge or something positive? And how can you use that and share that and deepen that skill? Because our gifts are skill. And I think for you, with what you just talked about, I think it was really the gift of growth, and I think the gift of curiosity,
Mm. Yeah.
because you observed what was happening, you know, um, and then you sort of provocated a little bit, and then actually went in and explored it further, which is
Yeah. Something
exciting.
that I will mention on that, Renee, because I think that it was such a significant time in my life. I knew
Mm,
that circumstance would have the ability to make or break me, and breaking
Yeah.
me is just not part of my
No.
MO. So I knew it had to make me. But something else that I knew too, that it would be such a significant event that if I did not address it appropriately, that it could change some of my core values. And one of my core values was integrity and trust. And I
Yeah.
did not want, because people said to me, "You're too trusting." But I trust
Mm.
people, or put trust in people that I would expect me to be trustworthy. So I did not go
Yeah.
around jaded. So I actually hired the most expensive, if you will, coach to support me
Yeah.
through that, because I knew that if I did not deal with this could manifest itself in me and completely change who I was,
Oh,
character-wise. And it was so good because I had to go through that process of forgiveness and
yeah.
healing. And there are no, those negative emotional,
Mm.
triggers that are there.
Yeah.
That was dealt with. And I'm so glad that I took the time to do that,
Amazing.
because,
And,
you know,
yeah.
we
And
all learn
sharing
and
that.
grow. Yeah.
And sharing that now. And I think you hit the nail on the head about values. Values are simply what's important to us, and we do a lot of work around this with teams, because I think companies have values, businesses have values, they're stuck on a wall, but it's around how can you bring them to life, and getting people's perception or definition of those values is actually a great collaboration activity. And also, I think, as we're recording this, the great resignation, I'm calling it the great rejuvenation, because I think it's an opportunity for businesses to go, what are our values? Are we living them? Are we in contribution? And I think you personify all of that, which is amazing. You are the podcasting queen, and I know somebody gave you that amazing, well deserved title quite a while ago. If our listeners, and our listeners are very broad, we've got leaders listening, we've got business owners, we've got CEOs, we've got students, it's very, very broad. If our listeners wanted to start a podcast, or have maybe just started a podcast, what are just some key tips
Yeah,
that
great.
you could give
Great
them?
question. One of the things that I often will say right at the onset is, let's have a look at some of the mistruths first, so that, there may not be some misperceptions. And so what
Mm,
I'm seeing a lot of businesses now do is they are comparing podcasting to
yeah.
mainstream radio, and the audience and community that you create are very different to, say,
Mm,
mainstream radio, because a lot of people think, well, we can monetize our podcast through sponsorships and advertising. But as often business owners, we're creating a community of our ideal clients who down the track, as they're building know, like, and trust, because you're
mm,
top of mind and you've created this unique listener experience, and you have a podcast that they subscribe to, they binge listen to, they hang out with you on every single show. You don't want to diminish the rapport that you're building and the
no.
relationship that you're building with what I call ad stacking, if you're considering that, if you're comparing it to mainstream radio. Similarly, too, imagine that every time that you create a podcast episode, whether you're doing a solo show, and I know you do some incredible solo shows, you've got incredible guests as well, a mixture, every
Mm,
single conversation, imagine that your ideal client, your community, is sitting across the table, and maybe while they're not contributing to the conversation, they're still part of that conversation. And if
conversation,
you
yeah.
can look at every episode and what you're doing, your content, even integrated with your podcast strategy, it becomes what you call this nurturing, this nurturing where you're walking alongside, you're sowing your expertise and your value into the conversation, that you're nurturing them along the customer journey. And for some customers, they're not yet paying customers. And so you need to ask yourself, what content are we really primarily sharing, and what's the outcome
That
that we want from our podcast? If it's this communication channel to your ideal client, who are they? Are you best supporting your clients or community because maybe it's new clients or new prospective customers? Or are you going to target your podcast to more people who are working with you already? So it's going to be more
yeah.
private. And why I say that is the outcome that you want to achieve from your podcast is going to determine the specific content, where it is shared, how often, and so looking at a podcast not just as a broadcasting tool, but very much a relationship building tool as well.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like anything, isn't it? It's I always use the metaphor. It's like going on a holiday. It doesn't really matter how you get there. You've got to know where you're going, right? So it's a bit the same. So you're saying sort of know the purpose of your podcast, what the outcome is.
Yes.
I know for us, our whole mantra is to make workplaces better places to work and create what we call limitless leadership in a limitless culture. And that podcast is part of us being a contributor of, our message. So that's really, really good to know, because I think there's a lot of people just jumping on, I've got to have a podcast because it's the in thing. On that note, what trends do you see in the future with podcasting? And
Well, I think, yeah,
for business owners, and also
yeah.
for corporates having their own, to build their own brand profile.
Yes. Well, I know that a lot of people who are listening and watching your show are thought leaders themselves. And as we know, thought leaders don't follow trends, they create trends.
That's right.
So what I would like to see them do is to realize that there are no rules to podcasting other than the rules they set themselves. So in other words, if you want to have a show that is 5 minutes, have it be 5 minutes, as long as it's intentional and the content is going to, deliver its purpose wherever you are sharing that, or whether you're going to do, interviews as well. So I think the trend is going to be you'll find that a lot of people who have started podcasting and then they realize, hang on a minute, it's not generating the ROI that our company had wanted, are probably going to drop away. And so if you really, as a business, are really clear on how we're going to leverage our podcast, how can we create a platform to become the go-to podcast in our industry, that will continue to really position businesses, ahead of the game. I also think that a lot of CEOs are going to be, leveraging, if they get it, if they get the space, then they'll do this. They realize that they can build a deeper connection with their audience. Now, whoever that is, customers, internal customers can be your staff, stakeholders, potential collaboration partners.
Suppliers,
industries.
industries.
And using that podcast as a vehicle to champion the brand message, to champion, their leadership, thought leadership in their industry. And if they do it that way, they'll find that their podcast becomes, this binge listen to across their particular industry. And that's for the people who absolutely understand the value that a podcast can deliver.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's important. I'm seeing quite a few companies doing more of it, especially through the pandemic. But I think you're right. I'm a big believer that, at a leadership level, and we're all leaders of self, even if you don't have a team, but you want to be what I call an industry standout. That's where you're limitless. And I think to be an industry standout, you want to be the first phone call. So if from a customer point of view, even if that particular supplier is not dealing with you, they ring you because you're that industry standout, you're that industry authority. And I agree. It's all about thought leadership, the term, coming up with original dynamic content opposed to being, thought repeatership, as people call it, and keeping it fresh, because it is, and I'll be the first to say, it's a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of headspace. There's a cost. And I think it's a nice, for us, it's a value add, and being available on, Apple and Spotify and all those different platforms as well, which is great. I'd love, with to start a podcast, like, what do you do first? Someone is there right now going, you know what, I've got something I want to share with the world. How do I start it? Or a leader in a business, they're not a CEO, that goes, you know what, I want to initiate a podcast for our organization. Where do they start?
Yeah, great question. Well, whilst often the second question to where do I start, the second question is often, well, what technology, what microphone do I need to get? And so firstly, I would say, focus on your message. What is that cut through
Yeah.
message and the purpose of that message? Because you can't, and I say this, you can't edit, with the greatest of respect, you cannot edit and mix compelling content that converts, that nurtures, that builds relationship and community from fluff and banter, even if it was recorded on the most expensive of microphones. So, message before
Yeah.
microphone.
Yeah.
So important. I also think too, so often, so not to worry so much about the microphone. I mean, obviously you want to have technology that
Hmm.
doesn't sound so distracting because it's, too much static and things like that. But secondly too, I think it's important to just to know that you do not have to put on a persona. So often
No.
I hear people go, well, I don't really have a voice and I don't really have that kind of charisma or that persona.
Hmm.
Well, you don't actually want to have that persona. And I'm not sure, I'm sure you've heard of the Edelman Trust
Yeah.
Barometer, and
Yeah.
they do an annual trust, take the pulse of what constitutes trust. And one of the things that they discovered a number of years ago, and I'm sure that it's still very relevant today, is that if you come across as being too media focused or too precise and too produced, there's
Yeah.
actually a
We
barrier.
rehearse.
So they
Yeah.
want real conversations. So
Yeah.
don't feel or sense that, hey, I have to put on hey,
Mm.
you're listening to Limitless Leaders podcast. That kind of thing. No,
No.
have
No.
those deep conversations. Because one of the things that I think, and this is kind of to what you said before, what kind of trends, I think communities will be built and continue to be built from a podcast. Have a strategy that gets people off your podcast and then interacting with you. Or if you've got a list or we always say start with your 3-part podcast series first as a
Yeah.
beautiful option to start that next relationship piece. Have that in place first so that what next? People who are listening, who are your ideal client or stakeholders, what is the next step if they're
Mm.
ready for them to take? And often people don't consider that. And it's all to do with strategy. Have the
Yeah.
right strategy in place, because then every single episode, which, as you say, takes time, takes money, takes commitment, is
Yeah.
going to generate the best results.
Yeah. And I think definitely, and I think there's something in, repurposing. We've had, as you know, some amazing guests, and, we have people contact us that want to be on the show. There's certain people we also seek out. But I think, those out there that are creating content know that, you've got to be regular, you've got to be relevant with your podcast shows, but don't feel afraid if you've had a great show and a great episode to, reshare that or refer to it. I think sometimes, and I'm guilty of it, I'm very future focused. What's next? What's next? Sometimes I go, you know what? I've actually interviewed about that topic 6 months. I've had my podcast, I think 2 years, 6 months ago. Let's share that. And we did that the other week and had an amazing response, because not everyone sees or listens to your podcast when it first comes out.
Exactly. And that's something I think I'm at fault on that as well, because
Mm.
you're always looking at the kind of the new guests, the new topics. However, in that aspect, you could have specific areas on your website or even in private client portals that you can continue to take, that
Yeah.
information and snapshots. And now that when I say snapshots, it's a smaller segment of an
Yeah.
audio, but also video. And
Yeah.
if you create these sound bites or video bites, it hones in on some core
Mm.
quotable quotes, if you will. And then for people who want to listen to the full show, you direct them back to that
Yeah.
main episode. And it's
Yeah.
all about how can I make the piece of content more consumable, and as you say, some people are not. It's a good problem to have, Renee, if people said, Renee, we listened to that 6 months ago, But then
Yeah.
I've always said, if anyone ever says to me, you keep sharing that, I'll say, and how is that going? Have you implemented yet? Because how often we're all guilty,
Yeah.
don't hear the
Yeah.
same thing over and over and still
That
can take action.
that's right. So look, today we're streaming from StreamYard, which is a great technology that we use for, a few lives that we do and a few pre-recorded videos. obviously we use a software called Audacity when I'm in the room with somebody or sitting face to face. Any suggestions on technology for people
Yes.
that want to get started?
Yeah, look, I love StreamYard and got onto StreamYard when they were still out in beta. I could see that this was going to be a technology that
Yeah,
really could leverage both the podcast and live streaming space. Zoom is something that I used for many
yeah,
years as well, and that has some streaming capabilities. At the time, and this may have changed, I haven't checked recently, but at the time you could stream to one particular platform. So whether that be
mm,
to Facebook or to YouTube, I would say find the platform that you're using already, and if that's something that you're comfortable with, then go with that. You don't need
yeah,
to try everything or get something with the bells and whistles. But Audacity is great. Some people just think, I do not want to do video at all. Well, then
yeah,
use Zoom and don't use the
yeah,
video aspect, just use the audio aspect.
yeah,
You can still on StreamYard record only and not go live streaming. But the platforms, I think, why not? While you're creating something, why
yeah,
not create content
yeah.
that will allow you to tap into all the different communication preferences, audio, video at
Yeah.
the same time.
And that's what, yeah, we've done a lot on Zoom, and they're always recorded as a video, but we've only been sharing the audio. And I think, with so much noise out there now, I think it's, nice to do this way as well. So people have a preference. And you're right, you've got people that audio that need to just hear it, people that are visual, people that are hands on that actually could be taking notes and watching and listening. So that keeps them I
Mm.
guess, engaged. So I would love to ask you, Annemarie, if there's, how do people find you? If people want to, tap into your amazing expertise, how do they find you?
Well, the best way to go is to our website, podcastingwithpurpose.com. That's the best place. Or on LinkedIn. I know that you're streaming on LinkedIn, to reach out to me on that platform too. But Podcasting with Purpose is a good place to start.
Excellent, excellent, and highly recommend. I've been working with Amber. I think it's probably 2.5 years. The end of this year, which actually feels like longer with the pandemic
Given
and
the
everything.
lockdown and everything, yes.
My last question, just on the podcast thing: how often is there science? Are there statistics that back up how often you should be releasing a show?
Yeah. And I again I identify what works best for you. I've got some clients that will only publish depending on whether they've got a show, and their particular strategy is to interview their members, the members
Yeah,
who are
yeah,
customers. And that
yeah.
works well. I mean, they just recently were listed as #1 Australian women podcasts
Mm,
in Australia, and sometimes they don't publish, maybe only once a month. But really, if you look at what is the purpose of the podcast, and if it really is to generate leads, generate business, you want to be top of mind with high quality content. And I
yeah,
would say if you could do something on a fortnightly, every second week, and
yeah.
be in mind that if you have something that you want to release, that can be 5 minutes. Five
That's
minutes.
right.
How many times could you record something that might be 5 minutes snippet that you could
Yeah,
do on an alternate week that will allow you to continue to at least have some content, some information that is
yeah.
being sent out, if you can do a weekly basis. I've had podcasts that have gone from daily to weekly to every fortnight, and they all work because the
Mm,
strategy that and the outcome that we wanted fit in with that time frame.
yeah. And is
Yeah,
there, just quickly, is there a preferred, I know ours are usually 30 to 35 minutes. My solo shows are 10 minutes.
yeah,
I know, you remember we interviewed the amazing CEO of GS1, Maria Palazzolo, and it was face to face and it went for an hour and a half. So we did that in a few parts. Is
yes.
there a magic number?
I think I would say go and look out at your audience and if they are able to give you feedback. Because
Yeah.
if I've had some clients that work with very busy mums and they don't have a lot of time to listen. So their podcast is
Mm,
anywhere typically from 10 to
yeah,
15 minutes. That
yeah,
has changed a little bit in the consumer behavior or the listener behavior, in that there's not as many people that are commuting to work. 20 minutes seems to
yeah,
be a really good time.
yeah.
Although I must say I had someone that loved 40-minute podcasts because that's
Yeah,
how long it took him to mow the lawn or how long he liked to have in the bath kind of
I
thing.
love
So
it.
catch up on his podcast. But, I'd say if you have a
Depends.
number of um, different sound bites of different lengths, as long as the quality is
Yeah.
there, because let's face it, if we're listening or watching something that is so good, it doesn't
Mm.
matter how long it is. We're going to
No.
continue to listen and watch.
You're spot on there. You're spot on there. And I think, yeah, you're right with the commute times. And yeah, you're right. Like I was doing a half an hour walk at 6 a.m. right through the pandemic. And if I wasn't going into delivery, because I usually just get my mind in that, I would listen to a podcast. So I think that's a great question, and the regularity as well. We've gone from weekly to 2 weekly to monthly now to sort of we've gone back to 2 weekly.
Yeah.
So
Something like that. I remember being asked, Renee, a question, or I saw a question be asked, and it was from a colleague who said, "What's the best time to, post on social
mm,
media?" And
yeah,
I kind of, private messaged him and said, rather than asking that, why not make your content so good that it doesn't matter what time you publish it? People think, oh, they're going to publish it. This is the time and day. I'm
yeah,
going to go out and search for their content because it's that good.
definitely.
Focus on that.
I love it. I love it. So speaking of time, and I know we could chat all day. Thank you so much. So much value there. I've got our 4 little questions that we always ask at the end or the start. So I'd love to ask you, Annemarie, favorite word.
Favorite word, adventure.
Love it. Yeah. Yes, I can see that. What is your most loved meal? I'm all
You
about
know
food
what? I
and
saw that
cooking.
question come up. I love fish and chips. My husband and I will go to Phillip Island or Tooradin and just, some fresh fish and chips with a fresh lemon looking out on the sea or the bush. Fish and chips.
Fish and chips.
Pretty simple.
Yeah, beautiful though, but it's the simple things. My favorite fish, like fish and chip fish, is down at Apollo Bay at the co-op. It's
Um,
my thing. I just sit there and I look out, and it's isn't it? You just have these little moments. I'll be doing that in a few weeks. Yay.
Lovely.
What sound or noise do you love?
Silence.
Oh, how are we friends? No.
Silence. I'm an introvert and
Yeah.
I love silence, Yeah. I've got
Does
too much chatter going on and ideas going on in my head, so I can
I
keep myself
know.
busy.
You love it. And what profession other than your own would you attempt?
I'm a multi-passionate person, so
Mm.
lots of different topics and backgrounds, careers fascinate me. But of recent times, there is one that I wish I had have taken more notice of, and that because I would like to contribute or at least know how it runs, and that is politics. So had I known what was happening now many years ago,
Oh,
I think I would have had a bit more interest in what's going on, so that I could at least know how best to. So that would probably be one that I would.
yeah, yeah. Isn't it funny? So you could it could actually be a gift though that you haven't done that,
Well, it could. It could.
especially in today's day and age. Anne
Exactly.
Marie, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your expertise, and so generously. And I'm sure everyone out there listening or watching has gleaned some great value. As always, I thank all of our listeners over the years, and I really encourage you to reach out if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the Limitless Leaders podcast. We've started recording again, and we're looking for guests to kick off in late Jan, and also any hot topics or things you'd like to explore. We are really excited to say that along with all our in-house programs we run with organisations, we've just launched the Limitless Leaders Group Mentoring Program. And this is a 90-day connection. So this is where it doesn't matter what business you're from, mid to senior leadership, you can come and basically collaborate, connect and grow with other like-minded leaders. So we're kicking that off on the 10th of Feb. If you're interested, you can see on the screen, just go to my website, go to programs, and have a look at the Limitless Leaders 90-day connection and have a look at if it's for you or not, or if there's someone else that may benefit. So as always, thank you, Annemarie.
Oh, thank you, Renee. Love being here with you today.
And thanks to all our listeners. Stay safe, stay well, stay limitless.